Thank you everyone for joining today. My name is Danny Durand and I'm the VP of Member Success and Hospitality, and have the distinct pleasure of introducing to you our presenter today, Chris Nealand. For those that have not met Chris Nealand before, he is CEO and founder of Cult Collective, The Gathering, and COO of Communal. He actually speaks quite regularly at conferences like South by Southwest, CDX, Global Shop, Inbound. I can go on forever. Also co-author of Fix, Break the Addiction That Are Killing Brands. He's also a professor. I don't know if you were aware of that part of his bio as well, at Mount Royal University, and holds a master's degree in marketing communications from Northwestern University. And again, Bachelor of Arts as well from Brigham Young University. And today, going to speak to everybody about identifying and qualifying prospects. So I'm going to pass the mic over to Chris. If you do have any questions throughout the presentation, please don't hesitate to pop them into the chat box. At the end of Chris's presentation, I'll get back online. And sorry for my scratchy voice. I'm just getting over a cold here, and facilitate the Q&A. For everyone that has registered, you will have a copy of the recording to go back over again and over again and over again, as many times as you like next year. But without further ado, I will pass the mic over to Chris.
Hello, everybody. I am on a giant Mac here today. I hope I come across, I feel like it's either Good Morning Vietnam or Howard Stern or something's going on. I hope I make it easier for you to listen to my somewhat feminine, nasally, sissy voice. Today's content is dealing with a subject near and dear to my heart. And all of these monthly sort of courses stem from user feedback of things that we see either the community struggling with or things that we see the industry tackling that we think are worthy to bring to your attention. This topic falls under the former. This is an area where I would argue most Communo members have some significant room for improvement. So I thank you for humoring me as I share a few ideas of things that we've researched and certainly things that we have tried, and you can learn from my mistakes as we've tried to get better at lead qualification. This is intentionally different than lead generation. We talk about lead generation all the time. We've had webinars about that. We talk about it in our info sessions. We talk about it in our one-on-one coaching. Getting more leads to grow your businesses is certainly top of mind for most Communo members. But I really hope to convince you today that this topic of lead qualification is just as important. And it's just as important if you subscribe to the idea that time is your most precious resource. And if given the option of having more time or more money, as your business matures, you will start to realize that having more time is actually more valuable. That's what improves the quality of your life more than more money can. Obviously, you need to have some basic level of money in terms of some of the freedom that affords you. But in the everlasting pursuit of more time trumps more money as we become more successful in life. And unfortunately, we're just wasting way too much time chasing bad leads that are either never going to result in any sort of substantive revenue generating activity, or perhaps worse, will result in some sort of revenue generating activity, but that activity turns out to be a really lousy client on a really bad project where you've killed your profitability, you've damaged your internal morale, and you've possibly even hurt your industry reputation. So we have to overcome this knee-jerk reaction to think that any check that doesn't bounce is a good check, or any dollar that can be deposited is a good dollar. We want to stop chasing bad dollars and start pursuing good dollars instead. So I want to start today with a bit of a metaphor. Some of you, I'm told there's a show on television called The Bachelor. I've, of course, never watched it because I'm a man. But I think it's been on in the background on occasion when my wife has had it on the screen, and I'm familiar with the premise. of all these women pining for one guy and hopefully receiving a rose. And the biggest problem that we face in the creative and digital industries is this warped sense of the entire new business process. And I think this problem is largely due to the fact, I think it's somewhat unique to us. We have not seen it in other professional services industries to the degree that it's rampant in the marketing, creative, digital space. And I think it's the result is that we have too many desperate professionals vying for mediocre work. And I use the word desperate professionals, meaning people who are living paycheck to paycheck or are too novice in this life stage of their career to have predictable lines of sight to anticipated revenues. And so therefore, out of their desperation, they are forced to make some bad decisions. And sometimes that bad decision is doing a project that they're either not truly qualified for or truly interested in. And sometimes that bad decision is choosing to work for somebody that is not a good client. And so because there's this, if you opt out, lots of others will opt in. More people just choose to opt in, and we've got this downward spiral. And it's just like in this reality TV show, there's 25 women that are all fighting for one questionable guy, right? And these women do whatever they can do to earn a rose, right? And in these scenarios, the guy inappropriately holds all of the power. And a woman, even if she gets a rose, start to think like, what has she actually won? She's won a chance to have her heart broken. She's won a chance to be humiliated on TV. She's won a chance to lose her dignity. Those are not desirable prizes, right? And even if she wins all the way to the end, I think I've read 2 relationships of the entire decade plus series has ever actually resulted in a lasting long-term relationship. And so it's just good television, but it's not good business. It's not a good way to find a mate, and it's not a good way to find a potential client. So something needs to change. All of this overly aggressive pursuit of lead generation has fooled us into thinking that the client is actually the prize to be won. And we fooled ourselves into thinking that we're the lucky ones if we somehow get chosen to work with that client. But the reality is it's the exact opposite. There are millions of clients that have problems, and they need solutions that they're not capable of solving on their own. They're the desperate ones. They're the ones that are failing to achieve their sales or profitability or growth projections. They need the help. And so what they're looking for is an expert who is capable of providing a cure. So if you have positioned yourself properly, then you'd realize that there's really only a couple hundred, maybe a few thousand at most, of clients who are in need of your services. And there's only a handful of practitioners as qualified as you, as capable as you, to solve their problem. So think about that ratio. There's 5, 10, 15 practitioners who could, with a straight face, claim the kind of expertise, given your narrow positioning, that you have. And there's hundreds, if not thousands, of clients who have those problems. So you're the position of power. You're the one that should have the waiting list outside your door to say, can you now see me? And that is a paradigm shift of how you go about thinking about the value that you're bringing into the equation. But you are actually the givers of the rose, not the recipients of the rose. And if you are not enjoying those kinds of benefits, you really are either not properly positioned, are doing inadequate lead generation, or inadequate lead qualification. And we've had conversations on positioning, we've had conversations on prospecting, and so today we're going to talk about qualifying. One of the challenges that we have with lead qualification is vocabulary and perhaps protocol. There really is no common definition of what we even mean by leads. There's kind of a common definition of what we mean by prospects. Prospects would be people that you'd like to work with, but who don't know who you are. So you are calling on somebody and introducing yourself for the first time. That's probably the cleanest definition of a prospect. Once they know who you are, then they don't become, in the purest sense of the word, a prospect anymore. They become a version of a lead. On the other end of that spectrum are customers, and customers are clean to define. Those are people who are paying you for services. But then you got this big muddy middle, right? And we just use these umbrella terms like leads to indicate everybody from somebody that's visited your website to somebody that's proactively called into your 800 number, to someone that you've exchanged business cards with at an event, to someone who has sent you an RFP, to someone who's friended you on LinkedIn. You know, my guess is most of you think of all of those as kind of the same. They're all leads, but they're not all the same. And your business needs to have a means of properly differentiating them. Because if you can properly differentiate them, then you can start to triage them and start to treat them differently. And treating different leads differently is all part of the lead qualification process. So I'm going to suggest a couple of frameworks here today for your consideration. You don't need to copy any of these exactly, but you should have something similar. You know, it's one of our challenges in these one-to-many coaching sessions is, you know, there's digital shops, there's creative firms, there's social media shops, there's solopreneurs, there's 10-person agencies. And so I really have pretty generic content on these courses that it's going to require some application and some effort on your part to connect the dots to your specific business. But if you're kind of starting from scratch, I think these generalities can be a huge time saver for you. So one framework for your consideration here is this inverted triangle. The triangle here represents time that is spent on new business activities. And there are at least 4 different activities that you should be budgeting some time for. Certainly budgeting talent for, either your own talent because you're really good at it, or talent that you're going to get better at, or talent that you're going to buy or borrow from somebody else because they're better at it than you are. And then certainly money. Business development, you know, the adage you got to spend money to make money is true. Business development requires certainly money if you value your time. Time is money, but also usually out of pocket dollars as well. My belief is that if you don't have the proper level of respect for each nuance of each of these phases, you're just missing out on a bunch of potential revenue. It's also why it's so good, in my opinion, to form partnerships, because it's really tough to master all 4 of these stages. And it's really tough to sufficiently allocate time into all 4 of these stages as well. You know, I'm certainly a believer of that. That's why Ryan and I became partners to begin with. He was just so much better at these stages than I was. So the other thing I want to say is if you're listening to me today and you're saying most of my business is based off of referral, I'll sometimes hear that a lot. I'll hear people say, man, I'm doing really great. I don't even have to do lead generation or lead qualification because I just have all these referrals. I have 2 thoughts. My first thought is, wow, that's good for you. That must mean that you're pretty good at catering to a specific type of client because they trust you enough to recommend you to other people. And my guess is they're recommending you to similar types of clients, doing similar types of work with similar types of budgets. It's really unusual to get a referral for somebody that's going to pay 2-3 times what the previous person paid for you to do because they talk, right? They understand what your services cost. But my other thought after kind of giving you a pat on the back is I pity you, for lack of a better word. There's going to come a time where your business is going to plateau. I've never seen a business that can scale relying solely on referrals. Sometimes you don't scale simply because, like I said, referrals will run out and people only have so many friends they can refer you to. But just as likely as you're going to fail because you're going to quit. You're going to get burned out. You're going to get bored of just, you'll be in your career 10, 12 years later, and you're still kind of doing the same types of problems for the same types of people and the same types of markets for the same types of industries. And you're no longer being professionally stimulated. And so you start looking for something else. And at some point you then realize, I either need to go get a different job or I need to learn how to generate business that isn't dependent upon referrals. And there's just a lot of tough lessons that are required to learn how to generate and qualify leads and to win new types of work from new types of people. That's best learned when your business is young, when your overhead is low, versus trying to learn all these new skills when you've kind of gotten a lot of bad habits under your belt. The other thing that I'll say before I jump into it is really at the end of the day, what we're all chasing is comfort. We all want to be comfortable. I sometimes refer to it as we want to have Goldilocks business. Goldilocks business means that you don't have too much and you don't have too little. You just have the right amount of work. Helping people get to Goldilocks businesses is why we started Communo. Communo is to help people that are dealing with peaks or valleys. Communo is less vital when you're kind of just running the comfortable part of the business. But when you have too much work to do and you're tempted maybe start turning it down, don't. Say yes and then bring in the cavalry via Communo to help you. Or when you have too little work to do, before you start spending a bunch of money on business development, lead generation activities, dip into Communo and see if there are either projects posted or clients available or partners that are looking for partnership. And so the challenge that we all face in trying to run our businesses is the unpredictability of it, right? Because you don't know when you're going to be at a peak or when you're going to be in a valley. You kind of get stuck saying, well, I can never rest on my laurels. I can never take my foot off the business development gas, because even though it's crazy this week, it might be a lot slower next month. And unless you have a lot of history, you don't know how long does it take you to turn a lead into a piece of business. In Colt's case, it takes about 5 months. So I've got to be doing things 5-6 months in advance in order to, I'm planting seeds that far out in order to harvest them in the next season. And if you're not properly managing that pipeline, then you're going to find yourself in constant feast or famine mode, as opposed to having the predictability that we all crave. And my 2 cents would be the unpredictability is only getting worse for creative, digital, and marketing professionals. The loss of long-term retainers, the high turnover at the CMO level, the commoditization of our offerings, the increasingly niche skill sets that adds complexity, the move towards project-based work, all these things are causing conditions that are making it wildly unpredictable. And even if something I've just said doesn't apply to you and you think that you're actually enjoying smooth waters, you've got to imagine millions of talented professionals are predicted to quit their jobs at agencies or corporations over the next 24 months and hang a shingle and start selling services similar to what you're doing. So, the storm is coming, so to speak. And so it's really important that we learn skills now, so that while all these newbies are jumping into entrepreneurship and they're struggling with lead generation and lead qualification, you've now perfected some of those skill sets and your business will be all the better because of it. All right, enough preamble. Let's get into this particular framework. Introduces the idea that what we would refer to as late stage or closing stage leads should be consuming the majority of your time. So ideally, you would have already been doing a fair number of activities that would have gotten some prospects or some leads to the point of now you are negotiating the terms of your contract. So these groups, the businesses that are in the late stage portion are almost always escalated to the most senior agency resources. So obviously, if you're a solopreneur, that's you. If you have a business development person, at this point, the CEO or the agency principal is brought into the equation. The skill sets at this stage requires negotiating skills. It requires how do you scope and resource plans so that you're actually crafting contracts that can be mutually beneficial and lucrative for yourself. And the other really important thing to do with late stage and closing leads is to provide reassurance, where a lot of people, I think I've flubbed that word, reassurance. I turned it into a 5-syllable word, I think. Where people screw up late stage closing deals is that they continue to provide ideation or credentializing. They're retelling stories that they've already told in terms of hoping to inspire somebody, when in reality what they should be focusing on is risk mitigation. They've already decided that they like you. They've already decided that you're the best choice of all the candidates that they've looked at. What they need is a form of reassurance that says you are truly capable of doing what you said you will do, and that your involvement with their business will produce the desired results. So this is typically where process framed case studies, this is where things like guarantees or warranties, this is where some creative pricing strategies could come into play, where you're now actually probably doing the most business part of the lead generation job as opposed to the marketing or sales part, where you're doing things that will hopefully result in really great contracts. And you should start every week or every day or every month, whatever your cadence is, with these opportunities. And only if time and money allows would you progress to the next stage, right? The next stage is what we would kind of generically refer to as lead qualification. And there's a variety of exercises that I'm actually going to go into in greater detail in a few moments here. But what's most important to note at this stage is that if you do lead qualification improperly, then you're just going to spend far too many resources managing leads that are just too early in the buying cycle for themselves. And so they're not actually ready to buy. They may actually never be ready to buy. And the problem with that is not only is it a waste of time, but it gives you this false sense of security. You're waking up every day or every week and you're looking at your lead qualification board and it's filled with more prospects than should actually be there. And so when I push back on community members and we actually dive into those prospects, they're just poorly qualified. And so they're not likely to be purchasing anytime soon. So the revenue that you have on your spreadsheets of, well, here's how I'm going to pay my January bills, never comes to pass because you never actually properly qualified them. And qualifying them takes effort. Like I said, this is the meat of the webinar today, so I'm going to do a deeper dive into this particular stage. But I just want you to realize that there's a problem with thinking that your pipeline is healthier than it actually is, because you'll start making business decisions based on a bunch of false assumptions. Most often, the business decisions that get made is you start to hire somebody. You hire a head of revenue, which is the kiss of death for a small business, because you're anticipating a bunch of business that's likely to close in your mind, but actually isn't likely to close if they have been properly qualified. And now you've burdened your business with overhead that you can't really afford. I've seen that also been done with investments in building space. Well, I'm going to have to move into a bigger space, or investments with some technology. I need to buy some software or some hardware. I need to upgrade my equipment, my camera, my computer, if I win this piece of business. And so all these expenses go out the door, and then nothing actually happens, and then you're left kind of holding the bag. So a little bit more on lead qualification in a moment. The third stage is what we refer to as lead nurturing. You should have numerous leads that have not yet been qualified, but are being nurtured by you. And this is just like fruit on a tree, right? They're not yet ripe enough to actually be picked, but they have potential. And so they require watering and sunlight and some fertilizer. And so your new business lead nurturing activities could include an email program, sending people newsletters, inviting people to events, sharing your recent case studies or PR news stories, or just simply exposing them to some of your thought leadership on social media. How you nurture a lead is a way of just keeping somebody from growing cold and feeling abandoned. I think that you can overdo it. I don't think lead nurturing need to receive something from you on a weekly basis, at a minimum on a quarterly basis, but with some sort of cadence that's right for your business. Make sure that you've got a nice mix of people who, when they are ready, will be able to call upon you because they've been following you. And then lastly, the thing that probably people spend most of their time on and they should actually spend the least amount of time on is just raw lead generation. That's why it's at the tip of this triangle. The least amount of time, not money. Keep in mind, some lead generation activities actually can cost more money than nurturing or qualification or closing. But your personal investment of time should be the least here. And, again, how to generate leads is a webinar for a different day. But what's important is to realize if you don't have strategies for all 4 quadrants, you're failing in some way, shape, or form, failing to live up to the potential of what is actually possible for your business. As a rough number, and this is so irresponsible, I was almost tempted to delete this slide, but we've gotten feedback that when I share numbers, people seem to like it. Everybody kind of likes to compare themselves against somebody else, but here would be a way to think about it. If you wanted to try to bring in between 8 and 15 new clients in a given year, and that's probably an appropriate number regardless of the size of your agency. That's an appropriate, what we call client concentration mix, is that you could be servicing anywhere from 15 to 25 pieces of business, and you'd want to be able to constantly fire accounts or be fired by accounts. And so your lead gen pipeline would need to be able to bring in the kind of that 8 to 15 number. Then at any given time, I tend to look at the world on a monthly basis. You'd want to have 1 to 3 pieces of business that were in the late stage closing effect. And then the percentages on the right would be conversion. So you would want to be in the 35 to 65% conversion rate. If you're below 35%, if you're only winning 1 out of every 10 or 2 out of every 10 proposals that you submit, that would be an indicator of a major problem. Or, conversely, if you're winning 100% or 80% of the things that you're bidding on, that's also a problem. It means you're probably not stretching yourself far enough. You're going for the low easy fruit, and you're not challenging the capabilities of your firm to learn new skills and to service new types of clients. Similarly, lead qualification, the people that you're actively taking through the next part of this webinar that I'm going to dive into, you'd want to have 2 to 4 leads kind of being qualified on any given week or month. And about 20 to 40% of leads qualified will actually pass. Pass meaning there's a bit of a test that we'll do in the lead qualification phase. And so we shouldn't feel like, there's a difference between a conversion rate of how many qualified leads move up versus how many late stage leads close. I like to have at least a 50% conversion rate. I'd like to think that at least half the time that Colt goes into a room, we're going to walk out of there with a piece of business. But I don't fuss when leads get deselected or disqualified. I don't want 80% of my leads to be disqualified. It would mean that I'm somehow attracting the wrong kind of audience. But I want to be really discerning here, and so my conversion rate gets to be much lower. Lead nurturing, you should have anywhere from 10 to 20, and that could even be a bigger number of people that have expressed some degree of interest that are somehow actively participating with your firm in some way, shape, or form. Again, responding to your social, attending an event, accepting an invitation, opening an email, those types of things. And that conversion rate is even much lower. You're nurturing them because you hope at some point some of them become ripe and get to graduate up. But you could have leads that you're nurturing for a long time, and 85, 90% of them never turn into anything. That's okay because you're not spending a lot of time or money on them. And then finally, the lead generation. If you're hoping to get 8 to 15 pieces of business, you should have several hundred prospects that you've identified that you're now proactively reaching out to, whether it being a cold call or following them, stalking them at events or whatever your approach is. And those can be really low. That's in the single digits, right? You in any given year, you would want to have 2 to 4% of the leads that you have identified actually run the gauntlet and go all the way through to some sort of a closed funded engagement. So, like I said, take it with a grain of salt. This is probably the least applicable for a pure play digital shop, and the most applicable for people providing advisory or consulting services with creative firms or some subject matter expertise like PR or copywriting kind of there in the middle. What I'm about to share with you in terms of the lead qualification details has been shamelessly borrowed from Blair Enns, who many of you have met. Blair Enns is a Communo strategic advisor. Blair Enns is the author of a book called The Win Without Pitching Manifesto and has been a coach in Communo this past year. We're big fans. We're disciples of his material, if you will. And one of the things that we pay him a lot of money for as a student of his program is understanding the qualifying process. So his framework has worked well for us, and so I share it for you today. And now you don't have to pay Blair's fees, but he does actually have a program. I'm looking at Danny now, but I think there's going to actually be some in 2019, some preferential treatment of Communo members within the Win Without Pitching sales training program. So if some of what I'm talking about today sounds like something that you'd like to get a whole lot smarter at outside of a 45-minute webinar, then I would submit his program to you as the best in class of anything that I've ever come across. So in this qualification checklist, you want to start thinking about giving every prospect a binary score. So a 1 or a 0. And sometimes creative types always like to deal in the exceptions or likes to deal in the gray areas, and force yourself without being overly optimistic or overly pessimistic to try to be very objective about the current situation and give a candidate a 1 or a 0. So a perfect score would be 4, because there's 4 criteria on the checklist. If you have 3 or 4, your answer is 3. And I know I told you there'd be no math today, but if you have 2 or 4, your score would be 2, and so on and so forth. So the first thing that you would want to score somebody on is timing. And this is the first checklist question, because it is the single most predictive indicator of winning a piece of business. There is something about a deadline that not only motivates a creative type to get the deliverable done, but motivates a client to get off the pot and to make a decision. And so when the client calls you up saying, I just came out of a meeting and something has to get out into the market next month or next quarter, you use that positive momentum of timing to your advantage. They don't have time to do an RFP process. They don't have time to dick around over, negotiating the pennies on a particular contract. They need the work done. So in the spirit of good, fast, and cheap, they're willing to go pay good and expensive because they need it fast. And so any prospect that admits that he has a marketing challenge that your agency might be qualified to assist with, but has not provided any sort of indication about their time frame to make a decision, is not as qualified as one who has. And so we need to kind of get into the habit of asking discerning questions that would allow us to have indicators about their sense of urgency. Now, sometimes you can just ask, what's your timing on making a decision about this? In other cases, you can infer based on what the request is. Is this for holidays? Is this for back to school? Is this for some upcoming thing on the calendar? But it'd be a truly awesome lead the shorter the timeline is to the end market date. And it is a truly lousy lead the more that they are sort of just kicking tires and curious about something that may or may not happen in the future. And unfortunately, because of decades of bad behavior, clients have been learned that agencies will do a lot of the heavy lifting for them. So if a client is fishing to get an idea out and has no idea what it would cost or what would be required, they'll issue an RFP knowing that you guys will now put action plans together and budgets together that they then can take to the board to go secure funding or to get a project initiated. And you don't want to be in that business of being their errand boys or girls to be able to do all of that kind of heavy lifting. So ask. Put some feelers out there and find out what is your timing. And there's also a bad answer. There's also times that the client has entered into a situation where they know the timing's impossible. Maybe a previous agency or an in-house resource shat the bed and they can't get the work done. And so the timing is, well, it's irresponsible. So actually the number one reason why people have a bad taste in their mouth with freelancers is freelancers are accepting impossible projects. The people have asked for somebody to do something that they didn't provide adequate time for. The freelancer was too desperate to turn down the work, couldn't hit the deadline because nobody could. It was an impossible timeline. And then the client feels jaded and the freelancer feels undervalued. And so being imminent is also could be a curse if it's too imminent, if you're not giving yourself sufficient time to actually do the best work that's required. The second criteria deals with who's the decision maker. Is the person whom you're talking to actually able to hire you or not? Where we oftentimes spin our wheels is talking to the underlings. And you need to have enough, pride or bravado to be able to say, I totally respect the fact that you've been sent on an errand here to gather some information, but nobody's better at presenting that information than I am. So I need to have a meeting with the decision maker. And companies are designed to make that difficult. Particularly the bigger the company, the more bureaucratic it is. God bless you if you have to now deal with a layer of procurement as well. But if you can't get to the decision maker early in the process, give the lead a 0, score it a 0. If you're talking to the person who is going to be able to have the authority to not only hire you, but then write your check, then you would give that lead a 1, right? I don't think I need to riff too much more on that idea other than just don't fall for the head fakes. I will frequently ask, is the person who is going to be making the final decision going to be in the room? Now that's about as gutsy as I get. I've had my business partner show up to meetings where the decision maker couldn't be in the room and we've left the meeting. We said, thank you, but I don't want to waste your time and I certainly don't want to waste my time. So let's reschedule for when the decision maker can actually be here. And I'll tell you what, that pisses off the person who's been assigned the task to find the agency, but it is respected by the senior level person that you're actually going to be dealing with. If you can't get access to the decision maker through the onboarding or lead qualification or pitch process, the likelihood is that entire engagement is going to be largely delegated to the underlings, and you're never going to have meaningful access to the decision makers. And so it's very difficult for relationships to, your position of power is always greatest at the beginning of those negotiations. So demand it or go in knowing that the lead's not as qualified as it needs to be. The third criteria is simply referred to as fit, but that would be, is the client even asking for something that you're most qualified to do? And again, the more desperate you are, it's amazing how all of a sudden how good you are at so many things, because you're just trying to find somebody that's going to pay your bills that month, as opposed to having the luxury of being able to say, if you really want to get what I'm best at, here's what you'd be asking me to do. Sometimes that fit deals with a specific skill set. I need a really great technical writer. I need a really great videographer. I really need a really great crisis management firm. In other cases, that fit deals with an industry. It's probably the biggest reason why we want to have hundreds and soon thousands of subject matter experts, because we want to respect the industries enough. You might be a great writer, but a great writer doing retail copy is not the same skill set as financial services or automotive or nonprofit or B2B. And while your skill sets could translate, I kind of refer to it as the difference between being literate or being fluent. Yeah, you can be literate, you can read it or speak it, but it doesn't mean you're fluent. It doesn't mean that it comes second nature, that you're well versed at it, that you're actually able to teach your client something that they didn't already know. And the same can be said about geography as well. We need to be able to respect the nuances of, yeah, I could work on that, but it would require a tremendous amount of travel. That travel has to be funded somehow. So is it going to come out of your pocket, or is it coming out of an incremental bill to the client? Is it in a geography that you can easily get to? So think about fit not just as I can do that job, but do you want to do that job? Do you want to spend that time on the airplane? Do you want to do that time in a different time zone? Sometimes the answer is yes. You're trying to break out of your little geographic bubble, or in other cases it's no. I'm at a stage in my career where I'm not interested in jumping through some of those hoops. So the last part about fit that's really important is, do you want to be the diagnoser or the recipient of the prescription? Meaning, do you want to be at the table when the client simply has a problem and you're now part of solutioning the problem? Or do you want to be at the table when they've decided here's the solution, which may or may not be correct, and now I need somebody to execute it? The further down the food chain you are, it's not good or bad, it's just identify where it is. And say, yeah, I'd love to do that project, but you've already done the first 3 steps of my process. So am I going to pick up on step 4 and be happy with that? Or am I going to make the client go backwards and redo step 1, 2, and 3 again? So sometimes you find somebody you'd love to work with in an industry you'd love to work with, in a geography you'd love to work with, but they're either just not quite far enough along yet, or they're too far along for you to be able to do the best work that you're trying to do. So it's very subjective. You have to decide, do I believe that there's a fit? And then your job is to convince the client, if you say there is, why you're the best fit for it. And frankly, this thing is probably the biggest thing that people do wrong in responding to communo jobs, is you don't adequately articulate why you're the right fit. The timing might work for you. Yeah, I'm not busy right now. I can do it. And I'm the decision maker, so let me have a go at it. Well, people that are requesting subject matter experts on communo are looking for subject matter expertise. So you need to be able to demonstrate that expertise as opposed to just your availability. And then the last one is budget. Budget is 4th, because you should always be able to find some type of workable solution for just about any budget. It might be a drastically scaled down version of what you've done, or it might be a completely outsourced solution where you've brought in lower cost providers that you've sourced through a platform like Communo. But rarely should you be walking away from budget unless you simply cannot find a way to, you do have to have somewhat I call minimum viable level, where if you normally do $50,000 websites, you should be able to do a $30,000 website. You're not going to do a $5,000 website. You might be able to say, I can't help you, but I can find somebody for you that can. But you should have enough flexibility in your offering. What you don't want to do is build $50,000 websites for $30,000, but you should be able to say, here's what a $30,000 website looks like. And if you're wanting to do that, I'm happy to do it. I could then upsell you to $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 as you demonstrate your expertise through that. But most importantly is, are funds allocated? And that's just a simple question. Have you already identified a budget for this project? Now, sometimes they'll say no, and you can dig a little bit deeper. If you don't get an answer, it's a 0. Sometimes they'll say no because they're playing a game where they are scared to give you a number for fear that your thing's going to come right back, coincidentally equaling that amount. But again, that's the silly games creative and digital providers play. No other industry does that. You don't buy a car, you don't buy a dinner, you don't buy a haircut, you don't buy a blouse without knowing what the budget is. So you've got to become masterful at asking questions and overcoming the first or second or third objective. Again, if you're dealing with a procurement professional, they are trained how to avoid that conversation. So unless you're equally trained on how to overcome their objections, you're going to lose that battle. So you've got to perfect this skill set of qualifying leads in order to be able to determine what the budget is. If you've got a client, if you have a lead with a good timing, you're talking to the decision maker, a great fit for you, and has identified a budget that you can work within, that's a 4. That needs to graduate now into negotiating and closing a deal. But if you have a prospect that is a 3 or is only 2 of those, I would say keep them in your nurturing or in your qualification buckets. Qualification bucket meaning I can't graduate this person until I find out more information. And in some cases, that information might be they have to get back to you on timing, or they're going to go find out what the budget is. So they stay in that bucket for a day, a week, or 2. If they've never found out, typically you don't want to stay in any one bucket for more than a few weeks, certainly not more than a month. So they should be qualified leads should be dropped to the nurturing bucket, or lead generators should be graduated to nurturing or just dismissed fairly quickly, right? Certainly within 30 days. What you're really looking for is a quick yes. That's the best possible answer. Yes, I've got those 4 things and I'd like to work with you. But no is the second best answer. No, I don't have those things. No, I'm not going to get those things. And then you can then move on, right? The third best answer is not now. That's a clear indicator of put them into your nurturing bucket, because they have said, don't ignore me, don't forget about me. Maybe later is still workable. But if you've got just maybe, not maybe later, but maybe I'll think about it, that's a horrible lead. And that's what's giving you that false sense of security. And certainly if you're getting ghosted, if you're just getting silence, if they haven't responded to your last 3 emails, cut them loose. We actually have a process called closing the loop, where we send a pretty strongly worded note about, hey, it seems like you've lost interest. We're assuming this is now not a priority. Nice knowing you, kind of a thing. And that's sometimes of a nice indicator. No, I'm interested. I'm sorry. I was just on holiday, or my mom died, or I've been dealing with something. Please keep going. Or they just are gone. And then you drop them out of your process so that you're not continuing to just carry a bunch of dead weight around in your business development pipeline. All right, I started with The Bachelor. I'm going to end with Miss America here. I love this picture because these women have to pretend like they're happy for the winner. They're not. There's nothing but bitterness and resentment in their eyes, and they're the runners up. So while timing and decision maker and budget and fit are the big 4, there's another runner up, if you will, 2 other things that you may consider adding into your qualification process. One of those is, has this client worked with a previous agency or third party before? The rule of thumb, the experts that are smarter than I would say, if no, run. You rarely do you want to be a client's first agency. It'd be like being somebody's first kiss. You're only going to get better at that as practice. And so when you're the first agency, all of their bad habits, all of their bad behaviors, all of their misconceptions are going to get dumped out on you. And in addition to doing the job that they've asked you to do, you've now got to teach them. You're now training them how to work with agencies. And unless you've built that into your rate, unless you've built that into your schedule and you've allowed for the time allocation to do so, and that's a hard sell because clients typically don't want to pay for that level of hand-holding. They don't want to pay for these statuses, and they don't want to pay for the overhead, if you will, of running an agency. It's just a hard go. So it's not a deal breaker. But that's something for you to think about. If one of the reasons why you're unhappy with the kinds of leads that you are generating, perhaps you're getting too many first timers, and those are just the most difficult types of clients to service. And there's another school of thought that would get a little bit into expectation setting. I mentioned that briefly into the idea of timing, if they want you to do the impossible. Sometimes the impossible is they literally just want you to do something that can't be done. Sometimes it can't be done because of the technology or the timing or the budget or their own culture. They just don't allow you to, they're too bureaucratic or they're too decision by committee, whatever it may be. And so there's some tactful ways that you can go about trying to understand what they're like to work with. How have they decided this is the thing that they want? What are their expectations? And then have the integrity up front to be able to turn it down if you don't think that you're going to be able to live up to them, as opposed to think that you're going to convert them to your way of thinking or they're going to become better because of how brilliant you are. Leopards rarely change their stripes. And so it's just another area where sometimes leads have gone sideways because they haven't properly vetted those. All right, I just looked at the clock. I went a little bit over. I wanted to free up a little bit of time for some questions. I'm going to turn it back to Danny.
Okay, I'll give everybody a few minutes to collect their thoughts and type their questions into the chat box. We have some few that are popping up already, but I have one question. Leopards have stripes?
Spots, I said.
No, you said stripes. I'll play the recording back.
Nobody mixes a metaphor better than I do.
Sorry, and here I am coughing now. Okay, so as everybody types their questions, you kind of got the one question I had in the runner-up a little bit, but maybe it's also timed into timing. Is an understanding of that where the customer is, or your prospect is, or your lead is in the buying cycle important? Like if they have started to do shopping around, or if they have considered whom else might be able to provide their solution, is that something else you would factor into your score?
Yeah, I think, well, so the four criteria really are just symptoms of that buying cycle. So whether you use the word buying cycle or whether you use the word they've identified a need, they identified the timing, they've identified a budget, and in the client's world, fit often means RFP or identifying, third parties. So I think of those as synonymous as the client's buying cycle. This is just more of an agency-centric way of looking at what's going on in their minds so that we can decide. The other half of that question would be, should we decide to opt in or out based on, I heard the client, it's a great fit, it's great timing, great budget, but they're already looking at 6 or 7 or 8 other firms. I would proceed with caution there, and I wouldn't pursue it unless you've had a conversation with the decision maker about what would be the advantage of being included. And if they say stuff like, well, in Colt's case, they'll often say, well, we're looking at a lot of ad agencies, but we're intrigued with what an engagement agency could do that might be different. I'd be like, all right, that's great. As opposed to if they were looking at 8 other engagement agencies, I'd be like, what are you not getting from them that you think that I could bring that would make this worth my time to try to reply to?
Great. We have a question. If you have a favorite contact management system for freelancers and small agencies?
By contact management, like a CRM system, I'm assuming you mean. HubSpot, I think is sort of the industry standard for, it's what both Colt and Communo use. I've heard good things about Marketo as well, but short answer is no. I actually believe you can do an awful lot of stuff in Google Docs and Google Spreadsheets. My business development team, when they do all their reporting up to me, is all done on Google Sheets. They use CRM softwares in terms of their outbound lead generation activity, but all of our lead qualification activity is actually taken out of that system so that I can understand it and be a little bit more strict. Workamajig, I know, is another industry average or industry standard that's nice if you're wanting to align your financial software, your accounting system with your business development and lead generation activities. Other than that, if not, then avoid it because it would be too much club for the whole.
Okay, well, thank you, Chris. I don't think we have any other questions at this point, but I think everybody knows how to get a hold of you. If something else comes up in mind they'd like to pick your brain on. Just a couple of announcements before we close the session today. There will be a survey that everyone who has attended, we'd like to ask that you just take a couple of seconds to complete, and it literally is 3 or 4 questions. but your feedback will help us greatly refine our programming for next year. I do want to announce actually the first session of next year. We have a guest presenter, Elise Binun. I don't know if I pronounced that correctly. Is that correctly, Chris? Excellent. She is going to take some time on January 23rd, 1 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, to talk about what she feels the 3 top marketing tools for 2019 are. By the end of today, the website as well as an invite on email and Slack will come out, so do watch for that. She's really going to dive into understanding how to get better clients with bigger budgets and knowing exactly who those better clients are. Kind of really great segue off of this lead qualification presentation that Chris shared with us. And again, thank you, Chris, for also sharing some actual sample messaging and scripts that have worked for you and your team. I know the participants find that extremely valuable to actually have some verbiage to run with and test on their own. But if there's nothing else, oh, wait, we might have one question before nope, no other questions, just some really positive comments. So then I guess I'll just end this call with, if I don't have the chance to speak to anybody in the coming days, wishing everyone a very warm and safe holiday season. Thank you for dialing in, and we will be distributing the recording in about a week or so. Watch for it in your inbox. Thanks, everyone.